Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about how Protestantism as a religion came about and it's the ramifications of that split in the founding of the United States and the sort of migrants that came to the United States. Now, some of you may know this, but in the year 1517, a priest and a teacher of theology in what was part of Germany, which was in turn part of the Holy Roman Empire back in the day, a priest called Martin Luther objected to the Catholic Church selling of what were referred to as indulgences. And these were effectively passports to heaven. So the Catholic Church was saying, no matter what sins you've committed, if you cough up enough cash, we'll give you this indulgence, which is a passport for heaven, so all sins are forgiven. And now these were in days when people viewed the body as a temporary, transitory thing and the soul as eternal, so that you would pay for the sins you'd committed unless a priest in the church forgave you for it. So that's what these indulgences were. Now, the Catholic Church needed a lot of money, and there are reasons for that. The nation states that we come to accept as being the natural order, or maybe until recently at least, the natural order of things. England as a nation state, or France or Germany, that sort of thing. So these nation states didn't really exist back then. There were more city states or petty fiefdoms or fiefdoms, if you prefer, and little districts that were controlled by some local aristocrat and that sort of thing. So the nation state didn't really exist as we understand it today, or there weren't many of them. England was one of the few, actually, back in the time. Now, this meant that the Catholic Church was really the only true sort of European or pan-European binding agent for that Central and Western Europe, and even parts of Eastern Europe. And the Holy Roman Empire, even from the days of Charlemagne onwards, was pretty substantial. It included most of what today is Germany and Austria and so on, Switzerland and the like, part of Eastern France, Holland, Belgium, and so on. So it was quite a large area and fused later on due to dynastic intermarriage with the wider Habsburg Empire, and in the end the King of Spain became the emperor of the Habsburg or wider Habsburg or Holy Roman Empire. So, but at the time, the Catholic Church was really the only binding agent, and they were being hard pressed by the Islamic hordes in the form of the Ottoman Empire. These desires to reclaim the Holy Land, all this sort of stuff, and this had to be financed from somewhere, and no one state really had the bucks to do it. So the only source of income that if you like was sort of pan-national and covered that whole area was the church itself, thus the papacy. So the papacy was very much a player in the games of politics and intrigue and warfare and so on. So they were constantly needing to raise cash to fight the Ottomans or fight off other foes that were a potential threat to Europe or to Catholicism. So there was a real genuine need for the money, and they like anything in decline, they overreach and start doing dumb things. So in attempting to sort of finance and fill their coffers with cash, they engaged in selling these indulgences, which Martin Luther, quite rightly in my view, decided was not really a good thing, and that and the church shouldn't resort to such outrages in order to raise cash. They should stay true to God and true to the faith. Now, so he pinned up a number of, if you like to simplify it, complaints about the Catholic Church, put it on a cathedral door, and so all could see it, and this created at the time quite a stir, as you can imagine. So he was ostracized by the Pope, and the Holy Roman Emperor had goon squads, assassination squads, effectively looking out for him. And so there are various petty princes in northern Germany who were looking out for him. So they'd send their goons to sort of apprehend Martin Luther before the Catholic goons could get to him. So it was a time of great intrigue and skullduggery and so on. So that's the background to that. Now that created what was called the Protestant religion, the protest religion, and this fitted in nicely with some of the political objectives that some of the regional princes had in Prussia and various provinces in Germany. They weren't that keen on sort of being told what to do from Rome, and so they saw this new religion or offshoot of Catholicism. And the only difference really was there was less pomp and ceremony, and that the relationship with God was directly from the worshipper to with God. So it's a direct relationship with God rather than through the intermediary of a priest or a bishop or a monsignor or something like that. So that was the sort of structure of it. Now, King Henry VIII in England wanted to divorce his wife, but the Pope said no. And one of the major reasons for this was that Rome was being occupied by Spanish troops, and the Spanish king and Holy Roman Emperor was the brother of King Henry VIII's wife. So politically, he was in a no-win situation there. And so really the expedient thing to do was to join this Protestant religion and get away from the influence of Catholicism. So that was that. Now, where the split came, and there were various civil wars, and there was a lot of strife in France, for example, and elsewhere between the Catholic and Protestant thing. The Dutch became primarily Protestant, again to get away from, because Holland used to be a province of the greater Habsburg Spanish Empire. So they went Protestant, England went Protestant, Scotland went Protestant, most of Wales did. Ireland stayed Catholic, and so you had a situation where northern and central Germany had gone Protestant. England, Britain had gone Protestant, and then there were pockets of Protestants around, Switzerland and so on. But the further south you got, the southern Germany, for example, stayed primarily Catholic, as did Italy and most of Austria, and even Poland was Catholic. So this is these are the sort of shifts in power now. As Britain, the trouble with the Catholics decided they must reclaim England as a Catholic country or a Catholic place. So this was very much a priority for them. A bit like the Chinese getting Taiwan. It was considered to be a priority in every respect, and there were various lavishly funded attempts to bring England back into the fold, the Catholic fold. So Ireland stayed Catholic. So one of the things that the Catholics tried to do was constantly stir up trouble in Ireland with the Catholics to get them to take away British military and naval resources, so it make it easier to invade England and that sort of thing, and also like a Spanish army, for example, would sail around to because most of England's defences were in the westward side, the eastward side of England. So the idea was that the Spanish' idea to sail an army from Spain. These were one of the tactics: sail an army from Spain through to Ireland, where they could be reprovisioned and revictualled, and then sail across to England, across the fairly narrow Irish Sea, and invade England from the the West. This was something that the English were constantly in fear of, and the Irish, were being Catholic, were forever open to and keen to assist the Spanish in that endeavour. Now, because of that, you then had situations where the English army was invading Ireland to put down the Catholic uprising that was believed to be simply a springboard for a Catholic reinvasion, or Catholic invasion rather, of England. So that's the antagonism between Ireland and England, certainly at that time. Beforehand, around sort of from even earlier than 900 AD, Irish raiders and pirates were constantly raiding the Welsh and English west coast and Cornish coast and taking slaves and all sorts of things. So it's always been a fractious area in that sense. So anyway, that was the thing. Now the English were deeply concerned about Catholicism returning to England, not least because a lot of the key government people would have been burned at the stake if had there been a Catholic invasion. So they were certainly well motivated to avoid that. And the Catholics similarly were quite motivated. And there's a guy called Guido, or Guy Fawkes as he's known, who was trying to blow up the Houses of Parliament. That was part of a Catholic plot against the Protestants. So it was still an issue of much drama and much commitment and excitement, sort of all around. And again, that feverish desire by the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire to reclaim England as a Catholic country. So there was this constant sort of paranoia. So the English produced or created a law effectively that Catholics couldn't hold government office or any senior office or political office, that sort of thing. And that was to make sure Catholics didn't get into positions of influence and secretly hire other Catholics who were pretending to be Protestants but weren't really, and then give intelligence to the papacy to invade England and so on. And it wasn't an unjustified position, by the way. It was even up until probably the late 1600s. It was a very real consideration. Following that, the end of Spain was in serious decline at that point, and certainly as the 1700s went on, so they weren't in a position really to impose their will on England at the time. So anyway, when it came to colonizing America, of course, then only British or English and Germans, Scottish and Germans were really the first, and the Dutch, because the Dutch had a colony there in New York before the English. The Dutch lost the colony during the 7 Years' War when they sided with France, and they lost the war, so they had to cede New York to England, or New Amsterdam as they called it back then. Peter Stuyvesant was the governor. So that meant North America was effectively colonized by Protestants, and the policies of the English government, British government, were kept up, that Catholics couldn't hold political office or any meaningful office. Now there were some odd exceptions, but it was very limited, and so Protestants were it, which is why Germans, English, and Dutch, and Scottish, and so on were really the only first settlers. Now this started to change. I think the English, what was called the Catholic Emancipation Act, from memory, I think it was about 1830 or thereabouts at least. And it was only after that the Catholics were, and this happened quite slowly, were permitted to hold, say, political office, government office, to be lecturers at university and so on. So that was quite a milestone, and they only did that on the basis of the perceived threats from other Catholic countries as being effectively non-existent. There would be no Catholic uprising in England, and at the time there was no military power that could really threaten British interests to any great degree. Even there were a couple of scares about France, but France was, there was as many Catholics as Protestants at the time in France, as I understand it. Now, this decision by the English to engage in Catholic emancipation meant that Catholics could go to the United States. They hadn't necessarily been prevented before, but again, even after the Declaration of Independence and freedom of religion, ostensibly, it was still very much a Protestant country with Protestant values and Protestant work ethics. So things like the Lutherans from Germany or Sweden were welcome, but the Catholics less so. Now, this changed after the Emancipation Act, the English Emancipation Act, and the American government started to take a different view as well. Not that Catholics have been refused entry necessarily, but they weren't considered to be the primary source of migrants. But then there were migration was coming from places like Poland, which was Catholic. And then there was Russian Orthodox from Ukraine and Belarus and Russia itself. And Sweden had sent a lot of migrants over. But then with, say, the Irish potato crop failure, then a number of Irish started coming over and they were Catholic. Now, the Catholics didn't fit in too well at first, and they wanted to have their own little groups. And you'd know from this the American history, like Tammany Hall, the Irish Catholic cliques and goon squads and everything around the East Coast, Boston, New York, and around that northeast area. So the Catholics started to come in, and again, integration wasn't too good. There were Irish gangs going around beating folks up, and there was the locals gang and the Protestant gang, and there were goon squads running around. And there was a movie about it which over dramatized the gangs of New York. I think Leonardo DiCaprio was the star in that, which gives you some idea of what New York would have been like. And this was during the time, say, the Civil War. And when the Civil War was on, when there was a big demand for manpower and soldiers and that sort of stuff, that really changed the immigration mix there, and they're far more prepared to take Catholics and other religions than they would have been previously. Britain was doing pretty well at the time, so there were the amount of migrants from there sort of dropped off, but it picked up from other areas like, as I say, Poland and Russia and so on. And there was quite a bit of sort of religious persecution going on in some of these places, and persecution for other reasons. Land holding and all sorts of things like that. So people were coming over to the United States to have freedom, and given the amount of territory, they could go and settle. The Swedish Lutherans, for example, could go and settle in Minneapolis or around that area, and be able to worship and pursue their faith without molestation from government agents or whatever. So that gives you sort of a wider view of I guess, the Protestant Catholic thing. So very real reasons sort of why these things happened, and they weren't maybe as arbitrary as some would think, but maybe that'll give you a more rounded understanding of the issue. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.